Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and today's show is going to be awesome. Today's guest is a dedicated leadership manager and an experienced integration project manager. He's currently a change manager at a major energy corporation. Please welcome Lee Goldstein. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I always enjoy talking about change management and how the industries are changing and reaching out to people. So this is fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity.
One thing I have found that seems extraordinary is the amount of passion that change management folks seem to have about your profession, and even more about the people that you're serving through that profession. So it's really made the podcast an exciting one to have, to just see that enthusiasm for what you're doing professionally really come out. And you're just a great example of that, as we got to know in the prep call. So let's share that with the rest of the audience. Tell me, let's start off, and I'd love for you to share with us what you think is the biggest challenge you see facing deskless frontline workers today.
Well, I think it's very emblematic of all of us right now. I mean, frontline workers are out doing the job at all hours of the night, when we're sleeping, when the weather's bad, and I mean, they're out doing it, and they're doing a very valuable job for all kinds of companies. But what seems to be missing, or the difficulty, is the connection. So if they're working back shifts, weekends, holidays, they don't fall into the normal categories for communication. They don't follow in the normal categories for contact or making connections. It's something that you have to be aware of, but it's easily overcome. I mean, if you value their input and you think that they really need to be involved, which they do, then you go out of your way to connect with them any way you can. And thank goodness for technology these days. There's all kinds of ways, including getting out and riding in a truck with them, going and seeing what they do. And it just opens so many doors and creates that connection that you can communicate with them. You get a feel for what they do. And this is kind of an interesting space for me for two reasons. One, I started out in field operations at power plants, so I know what it's like to be out there by myself and kind of being isolated and what it feels like. And then my son is a line person for a utility as well. And so I think about him being on top of a pole, having the best information he can, so he's safe. He's able to restore power to thousands of customers at a time. And so creating that connection, getting them the information they need it's a challenge, but it's one that is just, you just got to go out and make it. And the appreciation they have when you take the time to understand their world a little bit is just fantastic. It's just amazing.
I love that you started talking about the connection or the potential lack of connections. I've probably told this story on the podcast before, but I was out with a delivery driver, exactly as you said. I was out in the field in a truck with him. Yeah. And when we were talking about the new technology transformation that was happening in his company, he talked about stress and fear and the anxiety that he experienced when thinking about the technology. And he said something to me that I will never forget. He said, "I feel like I'm out on an island. I'm the one that's standing out in front of the customer when something doesn't work right, or I don't know how to do something with the technology, and I feel like I'm on an island." And that was such a powerful response to me. And I thought it was so self-aware of him to be able to describe it to me that way. But it just made me realize that, all of us that work in offices where our colleagues are right around us and we can reach over to somebody in the office or cubicle next to us and say, "Hey, I forget how to do this thing. Remind me." They don't have that luxury. And, they are literally and figuratively on their own. and that causes them some added stress and anxiety, right? And so as we're thinking about transformational initiatives around technology and the change management implications of that, we have to recognize that is the isolation that they feel.
Oh yeah, and it's very real. I mean, and it's you got, I think you have to get beyond just looking at them physically, right? Because a lot of them, the men are big men, they're strong, they're bearded, they've got hard hats on, they've got these harnesses on, and they look like they could just tackle the world. But at the heart of it, they're looking for those connections too. When they turn around and they need help, and they need help from time to time, knowing that either they have someone close to them, or they have the technology to get the answers they need very quickly, so that they remain safe and be able to do the job and meet the needs of the customer and get the company results. I mean, they all connect together. They're out there trying to do the best job possible, and every now and then they need a little bit of help, and we need to develop the technologies to make sure that they can get that connection when they need it.
Yeah. And Lee, part of what you're describing, I love the way you just painted the picture of the physicality of a lot of the men, and some women that are working on the front
Absolutely.
lines, right? And
Right.
the thing that I always want to remind people when we're talking about this is that it's not that these men and women just lack self-confidence, period. I do believe it's that they lack confidence sometimes around the use of technology. But I always try to flip it around and say, I'm a guy that's, you can hand me a new application, a new piece of software, a new piece of technology, and I just love to sink my teeth into it and go figure it out. And so that doesn't cause me any stress or anxiety at all. On the other hand, if you asked me to go climb a pole and have to go, hook up wires to, a transformer with hundreds or thousands of volts running through it, I wouldn't have a lot of self-confidence with that. And that would make me feel anxious and stressed and feel like I'm on an island, right?
Absolutely.
And especially if my job depended on that today. And that is the feeling that we give some of the men and women who, when we ask them to use this new technology, they've got all the confidence in the world to go climb the pole, drive the truck, back up a 50-foot trailer in between two other 50-foot trailers with no problem at all. But when we ask them to use technology, that's something that they're a little bit less comfortable with. And so it causes stress and frustration for them. And
Yeah.
so I just think it's so important for us not to think of them as people who lack self-confidence. It's just that they may have
No,
not
no,
have
no, not at
self-confidence
all.
in the area that we're trying to support them with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a very so one of the things I try to tell people about change management is that every change is different for every person. So you can get you can get a technician that feels perfectly comfortable putting 50 pounds on their back and scaling up a pole, but if they have to use a new app in order to do safety checks when they're up there, they don't feel comfortable. It is that level of, you know, and I think it's there's a number of different ways that you can look at it. Really, it's really eliminating risk in a lot of ways, and some people feel more comfortable, just like you said. If you sit in an office and you get a new Apple download that you need to upgrade the version of whatever you're doing, people don't even think about it. Yeah, download it. Okay, my buttons are a little bit different. That's okay. Now somebody could be stealing your data, but you still download and go, okay, I think I'm okay. I've got enough security around it. It's good. Now put yourself on the top of a pole and they've got a new app or they've got a new tool, and it's the middle of the night and they're trying to restore power to 10,000 customers. It's not worth the risk to use the technology. There will be paper in my hand that I can feel comfortable with, or somebody that I can call and talk to. Now that technology may be perfectly fine. It may be fantastic, but from a risk perspective, they don't feel like it's a safety, comfort level for them. So they rather go with what they know, which makes adoption of technology quite the challenge for a number of different avenues in as far as change goes. And I think everybody that has tried to do change management technology with field workers, I mean, you come across this from time to time, and the other interesting part of it is, and the huge challenge is that it's different for everyone. So you may have somebody that is very tech savvy, and they, they'll download, they'll use the apps, and oh, this is fantastic, and they'll create lists, and they'll do their shopping, and do everything off of technology. But when you hand them a new app in a work environment, they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
They just don't want to have anything, because they are in risk aversion, risk mitigation, and they say, I'm in a better place, I'm in a safer place going with what I know. One of the things that I think change practitioners have just they come to is the power of sameness. And so staying the same, staying where you are, feeling comfortable with the current situation, you can manage the risk, you understand the safety implications, and that power to stay right where you're at is incredible. So to try to take people that may go in harm's way, whether it's a business harm or physical harm, it's hard to get them to go to that next level and adopt the technology.
That's a really powerful statement that you just made, power of sameness. And I want to bookmark that for a moment, because I'd like to come back to that. But
Sure.
what I'd like to do before we get there is I'd like to help the audience understand a little bit more about your background,
Yeah.
how you came to be, and what your role is today. So would you give us a little history of what you went to school for, how you ended up in the role that you're in today, and maybe give us a little bit of your career journey?
Well, I think I've really come to appreciate the fact that nobody really goes to school for change management. Everybody has a journey to get there. So it's never a direct road. I don't think it's how do we get there? So for me, my journey, again, I was in the Navy. I was in the Navy, served on 2 submarines, got out, went to commercial power operations, worked as an operator in a plant, got licensed as a control room operator. And then I eventually did some project management. And when I was in project management, I came across my first change managers. It's probably the first time I really had any interaction with them. And then I went to organizational development and leadership development. And then I was certified as a change practitioner, but I really wasn't doing change management. And what happened was there was an opportunity in our innovation group within the company, and we got rid of all the contractors. So we had a group that basically didn't have any change management that really needed support. So I got the opportunity to join the group, volunteered to do it. I think it was, I don't know, it was kind of crazy, but I just felt like this was an opportunity where I could step in and help, and where we were creating tools to try to change the behaviors and also change the tools that were being used inside of the company. And so it was, there's two real parts to project management, change management, if you will. There's the technical side, and then there's the people side. So I was on the technical side. So if you're creating a product, or you're introducing something, building something, whatever, just call it technical. And then there's the people side of it. And so I really made that jump from the operations technical side over to the people side, because I try to tell people it's just that altruistic jump that you make. At some point, you really want to help, and it might not make sense, but it's a path to get to people in a new and special way, and an impactful way. And so for the past couple of years, I've been in a change management role, and it's been incredible. I'll tell you that you have to find it, but just about everywhere there is a community of practice of change managers that you may not be aware of, that are just fantastic resources in your area to well, now, I mean, it could be global, right? I mean, it could be anywhere. And your website and what you do is a great example of that, is just make that connection with other people that say, you know what, I'm really having trouble here. What has worked for you? And it's that journey. And I've known practitioners that have come through the IT organizations. They've come from HR. They've come from just about every field. But the one thing that pulls everybody towards that change focus is really they want to help their organizations. They want to help people transition from where they are to doing a new way of communicating, a new way of doing business, a new way of whatever it happens to be, wherever your change leads you. So it's amazing journey. I love talking to practitioners to say, how did you get here? Right? I mean, because I think most of us have education that's either in organizational development, psychology, sociology, some behavioral science.
Yeah.
Certainly my background is in organizational development and change, which fits really nicely with change management. Um, we've had people with MBAs, right, jump over and get practitioner qualified. I just think that the journey and the education is just so different for everybody. But as we kind of talk through this, I think there are some key elements that everybody picks up along the way. One is the education, and is social sciences, behavioral sciences, somewhere along the line, picking up those education part. And then the other one is the certifications. Lots of certifications out there. I'm actually certified by a company called ProSci, and they're very well known in the change community. They do a fantastic job of preparing people to be practitioners. But wherever you pick up your certification, it's understanding the structure of change and being able to apply it. And I just think between those two, we create some common avenues, and then jumping in to help each other. It's just how we get to where we are.
I'm trying to get my ProSci unofficial certification by interviewing a bunch of ProSci certified members on the podcast. And so, I think I can admit that 2 months ago, I hadn't heard of AdCar before.
Yeah.
And now I find myself using it as a regular part of conversation. And it's one of the absolute great values that I've gotten from, being one of the hosts on this podcast is just the learning that we've had from professionals like you. So, thank you for that. And thank you for the contribution that you're making. I want to go back to something, Lee, that you said that I think is really important. I'd like to spend a little bit more time on it. You talked about this jump from kind of the technical side of things over to the people side of things. And that's really, it was a powerful statement to me that I'd like to understand a little bit more. Was there a story? Was there an incident? Did something happen? Did you have an epiphany moment one day that you just said, holy crap, there's something going on out here that made you more aware and maybe turn your attention toward the human element of change a little bit more?
Well, I'll admit to you, and I guess everybody else that's watching along, when I was a project manager, I did have a change management support person, and I was probably the worst, right? I mean, I was probably the worst for appreciating change and what it could do. And I'll tell you I don't know that I had as much a single event, but it was seeing where I wasn't connected as a project manager and seeing the downfalls that I may have left on the table in my projects, that I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want the people that were in that position to leave value on the table because people weren't adopting or people weren't using the technology or the tools that were being created. And so it kind of came to me, but I'll tell you, the other part of it is that it went very well with the organizational development and leadership development that I was doing, because all of them really center around changing behaviors, the way people do their jobs. And so there's the tech side of it. So operating a power plant or putting up new lines or whatever it happens to be, there's the technical side of it, but there's the behaviors that go behind what they're doing on a technical side. So if you can get to those behaviors and infuse really, really good principles and behaviors, all of a sudden you can move the organization to achieve the results it wants to. Remember, this is, I think people think of change and change management as kind of like the soft skills. Many of us will probably argue that it's the harder skills because it's the people side of it. But in the end, it's to achieve a desired result. So think about a project and return on investment and things that you're trying to achieve. If you leave the people out, you will not achieve your goals. You just won't. And if you do, you'll be there for a short period of time and it won't be sustainable and it'll go away. So in essence, you didn't get what you wanted in the first place. So I think it was that turn to really helping people, demonstrate behaviors in their organizations that sustain the change in order to keep the company viable, to operate more efficiently, more economically. All those things fit in there, but it's the people. It's the people that matter. Tools will come and go. People will come and go too. But while you're with us as a company, here's what we need you to do. Here's how we need you to demonstrate these behaviors in order to achieve whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
So I think it is that focus that shifts a little bit. And I think when you come to that realization and you see the deficit, at least for me, I'm like, I want to help. I mean, I want to jump in and see what I can do to make a change.
Yeah. I think for me, I've always considered myself very sensitive to the needs of the frontline workers, and would have described myself as having a lot of empathy. And in fact, um, even in building and deploying and supporting technology solutions for the front line, I've always advocated for, the team needs to go spend some time out in the field with the men and women that are going to be using the technology so that we can understand a day in their life, understand the
Yep.
environment, understand the tools that they use, what type of trucks do they drive, do they spend most of their day in the truck, do they spend their time away from the truck, just all of those things that we need to consider to help build it. I think uh, what we missed, or what I missed in
Mhm.
some of that, was helping them understand why we were making the changes. So I thought it was maybe enough for us to go look at the environment and say, okay, well, this guy's not going to be able to use a tablet at this point in the process because he's got two tools in his hand, or he's got a tool in his hand and a fire extinguisher in the other hand, or whatever the case may be, right?
Sure.
And so we were really thinking of it primarily as a design standpoint. I think what we were missing, as I look back on some of the examples, was helping them understand why this implementation was happening, and that we really were there to help them and to give them additional digital tools that would augment maybe their physical tools. But I don't know that we did a good enough job as we could have. And I think that's the biggest thing that's come to me with a greater awareness and appreciation for change management, is that it's not enough to just build the solution, right? It's got to be incorporated in helping them, create awareness for why this is happening, and kind of answer the question of what's in it for them. Because otherwise, rather than help that anxiety and frustration about new adoption, we're probably actually pouring gas on that fire.
Yeah. So you know what, I can hear the pro side language. So you're doing well on your learning journey, creating the awareness. I hear that, and the why,
Yeah.
and then the desire of what's in it for me. And
Yeah.
it's I think that a couple of things. You're absolutely right. So everybody knows Simon Sinek, and he's his start with why. Leaders start with why. That
Right.
fits very well in awareness. It's like, I think if you go back to like management styles, go back to the 50s, it was okay if a supervisor manager said, go do this, and you really didn't question it, and they just ran off and went and did it like good workers. Well, those days are long gone.
For sure.
And so if you really want to get buy-in from your organization, it has to start with why. Why are we doing this? I mean, just give me some basis, give me something to hang on to, and then people can start get their head wrapped around it. And you're right. I mean, if you create a really cool app and it does amazing things, that does not mean people are going to use it. Build a cool tool and they'll come. That's not happening. I mean, it's amazing. Even if you get stakeholder input and you build it exactly the way they want, that does not mean they're going to use it. You have to get their buy-in, and it's really starting with that why. And then the desire in the AdCar model, when you talk about what's in it for me, I everybody has their, when you talk about AdCar or some of the change structures, everybody's got their hangups. To me, the desire piece is, it's very misunderstood. So let's go back to the app that you said, if you create an app or you create a tool in which, somebody it does an amazing job. It's not the desire for that app. It's the desire to be part of the change, to use the app. And it people have to get they have to give their consent. They have to give their buy-in, and be willing to open up and say, you know what, I'll give it a try. And then they can make that self examination and really say, well, the app provides a lot to me, and yeah, I'm going to continue to use it. Or, you know what, I know you say it's great, but it really doesn't do anything for me, and therefore I'm going to put it back down and not use it.
Yeah. So
So
let me be devil's advocate on that for a second, if I can. I
sure.
apologize for interrupting,
No,
but
no, no worries.
when you say people have to give their consent, I just want to push back a little bit and say, well, what about the other side who might argue, you know what, this is your job, like you have to do this, right? And whether you consent or not, this is what we're telling you need to do.
Yeah, and I would, that's true. There is that, but I would say that's what probably the bottom line down the road. That's not
Yeah.
what you go in with, right? And I
Yeah.
think there are still a lot of people that go in with that. This is just your job. I'm telling you what it is. Go do it. And so they may do it, but what are you losing along the way?
Yeah.
I mean, because I've heard different numbers, but active engagement in actually job performance day in and day out, and the numbers are, I mean, just staggeringly low, and people just lose that engagement. And that's how you disengage people. You tell them to go do their job instead of creating something that they can really buy into and understand. Now, again, there's this, I'm not really worried about the desire for the tool. This isn't about making people happy. This is about, are you willing to change for the better of the organization? So even though it's what's in it for me is personal to me, but at the same time, it may be about the company, not you as a person. And then if you say, hey, if we get 80-90% of the people to use this tool, we will save X number of dollars. And what that'll do is that'll prevent us from firing somebody. And I may say, you know what, I really think the tool stinks, but if it saves somebody's job, I'll do it.
I'm in.
I'll do it. And if you create that awareness and you give them the why, and you allow them to understand, that's how you create that buy-in. Now, if they keep saying no, 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 at some point, change management sometimes shifts to performance management. So you have those people that just don't buy in, and I don't care what you tell me to do, I'm not going to do it. Okay, now we're jumping to a different space, right? That's where the change manager goes, I'm out. Here's what we're facing, and we're in performance management space. Mr. or Mrs. Supervisor, you got to step in and take care of this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that. I was thinking as you were describing this scenario and answering my question about, you just have to do this. I think one of my own answers to my own question would be that having to do something may meet the minimum requirements.
Yeah.
To say, hey, all right, I'm using this technology. Fine. All right. You're making me use it. It's part of my job. But adoption or engagement is not binary. You don't either have it or you don't have it. I think there are levels of adoption and engagement with technology in particular, actually probably with all business processes, but in particular with technology. And there's a vast difference between a user who's kind of half-assed using the technology just because their boss made them versus somebody that's really embracing the power of this. And I think the difference can often be just explaining what the downstream implications are. We just had, I won't say the proper names just because he's been on this podcast, but he actually did a fantastic job of kind of addressing some of the level of engagement some of the users. And one of the things that he did in his analysis was he tracked back the implications of those users not using the technology correctly or using it partially. And the impact to the business was profound. And he started to document, how many incidents are we having where the users in the field aren't using the technology right? Who's impacted by that in the back office? What's the impact of each one of those times? Well, to be able to then bring that communication back around to the men and women in the field and their leadership to say, I know you think that just taking this shortcut, is great because it's saving you 30 seconds, but I want to just show you now all the implications that you're having on all of your teammates throughout the business, right? And what that ultimately means back for you. It means that instead of supporting you better in the field, they're now doing a lot of busy work to make up for the fact that you tried to take a shortcut, right? And so I just think it needs to be a full loop communication to really help them understand the impact of what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
And we owe it to them. I think we owe it to them to communicate better so that they can understand what the impact is.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the book Switch?
I'm not.
So Switch is it's a very interesting look at change. Chip and Dan Heath. It's just a fantastic book. But one of the lines from the book that I really appreciate is the fact that what often appears like resistance is actually a lack of clarity. People just don't understand. And so it looks like they're resisting the change, but in fact, we haven't communicated well enough or clear enough to where they can create that buy-in and say, all right, I get it, I'm in. And so I, when we talk about resistance management and change, and change space, I mean, it's a real thing, but, I try to start those conversations with, are we sure they understand? I mean, do they really get it? And yeah, I told them 4 times. And I'm like, no, I know you told them 4 times, but do they have it clearly what we're trying to do? Create the why, understand the what's in it for me. Do they really get it? And they're like, well, I don't know. Well, all right, let's go find that out. right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's go figure that out first. And if they're really clear and they still have problems, all right, then they'll send us one direction. But we may be able to clear it up with just a simple conversation, which is
Well, I love it. And I've pulled the book up on Amazon now. And just for our audience who may be listening and may also be interested in reading this, the name of the book is Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard.
yeah.
And it's written by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. I assume that they're related.
I think they're brothers.
Okay. So that is the right book, and it looks awesome, and I appreciate your description of it. So I'm going to add it to my list right now, and I'm
It's a
definitely
great
gonna
read.
look at that. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so I want to switch back. So we've talked a little bit about kind of our view out to the men and women who we're asking to change.
Mhm.
Let's flip it around for a minute and put ourselves in their shoes. And if I were to ask them what they think is really the biggest challenge that they face as it relates to kind of these digital transformational initiatives, what do you think they might say back to us?
I think again, all the changes are a little bit different. Challenges, I, I don't know. I mean, the difficulty. Are you saying like the difficulty that they face in the
Yeah.
field?
Yeah.
Well, I think that, and again, I just to throw out a reference here, maybe something that everybody can take a look at. But Bree Groff talks about change and loss, right? 6 different losses that take place as things are changing, and I really think that I try to at least take into account when people are moving, they're transitioning from a current state to another state. What do they feel like they're losing? For those men and women that are on top of a tower somewhere or out in the field, maybe it's safety, maybe it's anonymity, maybe it's control of their situation. They're losing something, and so it's very difficult to ask a direct question. Hey, what do you feel like you're losing? But at the same time, and I think this comes back to those listening skills when you're talking to people and understanding. It's like, what do you feel? Where is it that you feel like you're losing control? And here's where people talk about older generations and some of the older workers that are in the workspace. I mean, think if they've been doing something for 10, 15, 20 years, they're losing a lot of comfort. They're losing some safety, maybe some, and it's like, okay, well, that's great to recognize and address. It's okay. It's like, hey, I'm very good at this. So now I've got something new that I've got to do. I'm going to lose my status. I'm going to lose my reputation because I don't know what I'm going to be doing with this new app. And you have to address those, right? I mean, it's where is that loss that they're feeling, and everybody's different. This is where we all come to change with different experiences, different backgrounds. You have a different home life. So what is it? I like, we'll go back to shameless plug for ProSci again, but I mean, it's not like the change is a big block of people. If you have 100 people in the organization, it's not one change that's taken place, it's 100 changes. And so you have 100 people experiencing either a loss and or a gain. Where are they? And how do you address them? And if you have a group of older workers that are going to change, it's funny, you can't make the assumption that they're going to lose anything. It's talk to them, listen to them. What are you guys feeling? What are you thinking? Is this something that's going to work for you? No. Okay, that's great. Why not? If they said yes, you go, okay, great. Why do you think it's going to work? And then that becomes part of your story as far as the change goes. And it's just every situation being different and being able to customize your approach to not only what is changing, but who's being impacted.
So I'm going to combine 2 things that you've said, because I think they're kind of different variations of the same thing. In the beginning of our conversation, you talked about the power of sameness.
Yeah.
And, knowing that you've been around utility organizations, and I've done a little bit of work around utilities, one of the things is that, the type of cultures that tend to be surrounding utilities are very risk averse,
Yep.
very safety and procedure focused.
Absolutely.
And there is inherent rigidity in the culture of those organizations, actually, like by design. That's intentional.
That's right.
And yet that is counter to the push for innovation. right?
Yes.
So when
Very.
we talk about digital transformation in areas outside of those things of safety and risk aversion and things like that, we're talking about being agile and making changes quickly and iterating fast. And I think to people in utilities, I'm making a big generalization here, but I think the utilities culture, that feels very nerve-wracking to them, right? So here we are saying, let's the power of sameness, right? We know how to do this. We've done it this way for 20 years. We've made only very mild modifications to this procedure or this form or this process, whatever the case may be. And now we're bringing technology out in the field and we're talking about this rapid iteration. And I think that's really interesting. And you then position that to say, well, what does that user feel like they're losing in that process, right?
That's right.
So that power of sameness. And now the flip of that is, okay, you're telling me I have to change. What is, what's the trade-off for that? And I hadn't really thought about it in terms of the trade-off and the way that you just described it. I think that's really interesting.
It is. And it's funny when you talk about change, you can kind of turn things around and back up and double back on yourself pretty quickly and almost argue yourself out of what you just said before. But at the same time, I think there is a way to manage it. I mean, so for a utility worker a utility that's been in business for decades, really 50, 60 years, if you want to be around for another 40 or 50 years, because we're certainly going to need the power, deliver the power, communication, telecommunications, wherever it happens to be, you do have to adapt and change. So even though there's the power to sameness, you can't stay here. We cannot stay here as a group. We have to move forward. And what does that look like? So I think that if you really show the benefit of what you're doing, and I'll, remote monitoring, wireless technology, Bluetooth technology, all of these things, if you find a way to work them into where you're able to really extend the life of the business, but at the same time show benefit, and you mitigate the loss, whatever the loss happens to be, then you find this sweet spot where people will buy into it and actually make the change. And it helps everyone. So it's a personal focus, it's a business focus. And when you align the two, you're in a very powerful space. I think that it's not that change is any easier, but you're able to continue to move forward. And again, give them the why, make them, allow them to understand. And it's interesting, and I know that the format focuses quite a bit on the frontline workers, but it is quite the challenge for supervisors and managers of those frontline workers. I mean, it's a real challenge for them as well to introduce the change, to help them transition, to be that first line of communications that they're going to rely on the most in order to get their information. And it's just allowing them, it's kind of funny, but I have to remind people every now and then, it's like, hey, managers are people too, right? I mean, they have got to go through a change process themselves, absorb the change before they can help other people do it. And so we often tell them, you need to go tell your people this, you need to do this, you need to do that. And we don't allow them to go through that AdCar journey on their own. And so they don't understand why, or they're a little bit unclear, and that's where the lack of clarity comes in. And so they don't convey it well, and it just creates this avenue of misunderstanding that is counterproductive to what we're really trying to do.
I could not agree with you more. And we've been talking about this at my company recently, actually, just very specifically over the last few weeks.
Sure.
Where we've been talking about implementing the technology solution. So we have this platform that helps frontline workers adopt technology with less stress and frustration. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today, but they're not the only stakeholders in this. And, they're direct line supervisors and managers, and the whole chain of leadership that works in the organization has to be as on board and as we're expecting the frontline workers to be. And there's change for everyone, even in terms, if you're going to implement new technology, whether it's our solution or other similar solutions on the market and things like that, leadership has to be changing their behavior too for how that technology is used.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that be overlooked in some companies today. And, so as a partner with those companies, we want to look for ways that we can help them mitigate that risk of saying, hey, you can't just drop in this new tool or a new practice into the
Yeah,
frontline workers and say, hey, we made this investment. Good luck. Let us know how it goes. It needs to be a part of the change for all of their leadership so that they're embracing it and they can provide new coaching to those frontline workers that, applies to the new way of doing business.
absolutely. And I mean, if you think about structure, and there are all kinds of structures that are out there to help people understand what the change process looks like. And then every level of the organization has to go through that change themselves. And I would say that the more you get to the frontline worker, the more it expands out. So you may have somebody that's in a corporate office role, typical office work. They get it. They're like, okay, yeah, whatever, and they keep moving. But then that has to expand to a manager, and then it expands again into a supervisor that's dealing with the frontline. And then your biggest bucket that you need to work with are the people that are actually directly, challenged by the change. But if you ignore anyone on that level and establish at least their minimum requirements, you'll have a really, really tough time getting frontline workers to move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I've found, and I haven't like charted this out on any type of graph yet, but it seems that the people in change management practitioners that have some connection, and actually this isn't true of just change management professionals. This is probably all folks that we've interviewed on this podcast that have a role in innovation in implementing change with frontline workers. But those that have some personal connection to the men and women on the front lines seem to bring an added level of passion to the conversation. So some folks that we've interviewed on the show have, they used to be a delivery driver in an organization, either in the same organization or in one just like it, that they now are a leader in. And so they have a personal connection with those men and women on the front lines. You mentioned that your son is a line worker as well. And I wonder how that impacts when, the empathy that you have for the men and women on the front lines. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I know we just touched on it for a few seconds at the beginning, but tell me more about, how you might think of your son and how does he become kind of a representative in your mind for all the other men and women for whom you're trying to, address change?
Yeah. Well, it's personal, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's, but I think it extends beyond. I don't work with his part of the organization at all.
Yep.
But it adds that appreciation, and having been out on the front line, standing there with a clipboard in your hand, wondering what the heck to do. I mean, I think just having that appreciation for having been in that spot at one point, it just frames it differently, right? I mean, it just gives you a different approach. If you've never been out there in the field, or if you've never been part of an industry, or it just, I think it adds to really your basis on a personal level to say, and it could be alarm, but if I had somebody that was climbing a tower that, in an organization I was supporting, and they were trying to do, communications equipment, whatever it happens to be, I very much link them to my experience, my son's experience, other people that are out there that, you just, I don't know, it's just like this internal, you get it, that it is impactful, it matters. I mean, beyond what probably words can express. And you just, I don't know. I just think that if you, so let's say you're a professional that comes in to work with a utility. You may not have that walking in, but you can get it. I mean, just like you said, that ride around in the truck, that's fantastic. And you know what you're doing. You're building an advocate for change with whoever you're riding around with. And at the same time, you're increasing your knowledge. You're gaining experience that you're not going to climb the pole. You're not going to be up in the bucket. You're not going to be doing whatever. But at the same time, you're there. I mean, you're there. And so I think that anybody that's a change practitioner or is in the behavioral science field, it's very much a two-way street. So as much as I'm helping people to learn and grow and use different tools, I'm learning as well. And I every change experience I go through, I'm learning an unbelievable amount, either about the organization, the technology, the whatever it happens to be. I mean, you just go on and on. Individual behaviors. I mean, I just think you have that appreciation for and the openness to understand where they're at, and it changes really how you approach not only that specific change scenario, but all future endeavors. I mean, it just changes how you approach things.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great way to explain it. And I think getting out to meet with the men and women in the field is so critical. And as I described before, I always believed that when we were building new technology solutions for the front lines. But I think now, even in a different role where we're thinking of how to implement those technologies and really support that change, an example of one thing I remember distinctly from a utility company, this is gas, not electric, but we went out to go do line locates with some of the guys, and we got out on site and they had tough books mounted in the cab of their truck. So that was the technology that they were using, maybe similar to what you guys have. But when we got out on site, what we realized is the guys keep the tough book in the truck, and they were walking up to 500 feet away from their truck to go do the work that they had to do. And then if they needed to reference any other information, they had to go back. Now, the tough book technically could be taken out of the truck, but it was kind of cumbersome and it wasn't always practical, especially with weather. And they had other tools. They were actually using scanning tools to scan on the ground, right? Which is also cumbersome tools, right? So to have a laptop, a clamshell laptop in one arm and have the scanning tool in the other, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the scanning tool, but they're using a bunch of these tools. And so the reality was, what was different from the conference room is in the conference room back at corporate, everybody thought that the guys were carrying the laptop out right to the point of activity. In the real world, the laptop was staying in the cab of the truck and he's walking up to 500 feet away. And then we had to input data into the system. He had to walk back 500 feet. So what was he doing? He was writing stuff down on paper, bringing that stuff back to the truck. And so when you just get out in the field and you experience that and you're like, hey, we just told these guys all they needed to do is input that data into the field. I don't understand why it's so hard. Right. But 5 minutes out in the field, it was the first stop that we did that day. First one. And we saw that change and we're like, oh, now we get it. Okay. We got to rethink this a little bit.
But I mean, so I mean, you're learning, you're gaining an appreciation, but I'm telling you the impact you have on the people that are, I mean, do it when it's raining, right? Not when it's easy on a sunshiny day. Go out there when it's, 2:00 in the morning and they've got to restore power. They've got to find a line or they've got to break somewhere. Now, all of a sudden you have just made the best friend that you could ever have, not maybe on a personal level, but also from a change perspective, because now they know you care. Right. I mean, if they're not going to listen to you, they're not going to, but if all of a sudden you prove that you really care about their impact and how they are able to do their job safely, all of a sudden it's a whole new conversation. And you're able to, one of the, we don't talk about it, but one of the just fundamental elements in change as you're moving from one state to another is grace, and giving each other grace, and just listen, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be okay. And that benefit of the doubt, all those intangible things, when you're out with somebody, all of a sudden they're willing to extend you some grace or to give you the benefit of the doubt. Or this isn't somebody back in the office that's, trying to make my job harder. They are really fighting for the best. And it just makes a world of difference. And adoption and also on the employees and how they do their work. I mean, it matters, right? I mean, they understand that it matters. Now, all of a sudden you understand that their job matters. It's just an amazing journey to go on with them.
To show how much I agree with you, the story where the gentleman, his name was Eric, that told me that he felt like he was going to be out on an island. That conversation was had at 2 a.m. in the cab of his truck. Because that's when he started his shift. He started his shift at 2 a.m. and he wrapped up somewhere between 10 and noon every day. And so the company that we were working with said, hey, if you want to go do a route ride, you're going to have to be here at the depot at 1:30 in the morning. And so we said, hell yeah, we'll be there. And so I think you're right. I mean, it's pitch black. We're in the middle of a depot in the middle of nowhere. And so we're having this conversation with this guy, Eric, and he really, really opened up. And I believe in part the reason that he opened up is because we were, number one, we were in his comfort zone. We were in a place that he's comfortable, which, oddly enough to some of us is the cab of his truck, right? Drives a tractor trailer. That's his comfort zone. That's what he knows and loves. Right. And the fact that we'd taken the time to come out and visit with him at a crazy time of day, I think gave him a level of comfort with us. And so he
Yeah.
shared some pretty deep thoughts, right? And he was very self-aware about those things. I don't know that we would have gotten that had we asked those questions, had we called him into a conference room and said, hey, we want to sit down and, ask you 20 questions about your job. I don't think we would have gotten, quite the same input. And so
Well,
I do think that's really important. I think everybody needs to understand, what you said, which is getting out there and not necessarily in the best of times.
and I mean, the best information doesn't come in a survey. It doesn't, it just, and quite frankly, I think we're all finding this after being a little bit more isolated after 2 years. It's like you're missing that connection. I mean, I know I'm to the point where, listen, I've appreciated the work flexibility and being at the house and that sort of thing, but I need that connection. I need to get back to where we talk to one another and we look at each other and we're able to, see how each other feels in the situation, beyond what a screen shows. And there's just so many intangibles, either getting a drink after work or seeing each other in the parking garage or whatever it happens to be, that when you're able to bridge those gaps and actually get together and look at one another and sense each other where you're at, it makes all the difference in the world. It really does.
Couldn't agree with you more. We're kind of getting toward the end of this session here, and I want to ask you to give me your take on what one of your favorite things or what some of your favorite things are about working with technology.
Well, this should probably be no surprise when you talk to a change manager, but things are constantly changing, right? People are looking at things differently. New eyes, new basis, new needs, I mean, there's always new. There's always new around. And technology, I will say there, we're kind of faced a little bit. AI is a big topic for us, and people, again, you get back to the loss. People say, well, if you create a tool that does my job using AI, then I'm going to lose my job. And I think it's really creating that balance between let's let machines do what machines can do, so the people are able to do what people really need to do. And I think it's that separation. And if you think about it, it even goes back to lawnmowers, right? I mean, the old push lawnmowers, and now you have the motor driven lawnmowers, and now we're going electric. And let the machines do what the machines can do, so that you can do something else with your day. It's a matter of finding capacity and time and creating stability so that you can go on and do what you want to do. Well, technology facilitates all that. I mean, whether it's AI, it's machine learning, it's apps, it's new programs, or whatever it happens to be, and even to machinery, right? It's amazing. So certainly from a change perspective, it's never ending. I mean, it will always be something that we as people in an organization or by yourself have to deal with, and change is what can help make that transition easier and more productive.
I'm really stimulated also by the innovation and the benefits that come with that. And so I have to be very deliberate in remembering that not everybody is as stimulated by that change.
Ooh.
And so we need to be careful about that, because I know that does create a lot of fear and anxiety with some of the other
right.
folks.
And you look at it on one hand and you go, well, it really doesn't make sense, but on the other hand, well, I mean, it kind of does, and it goes back to that loss. Yep. But having an algorithm that can look at millions of pieces of data and say, you know what, your best solution is this, and doing it in a fraction of a second, it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's amazing. So where do the possibilities end? I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the other thing, I think that technology and innovation is one of those things that means different things to different people, obviously. So, when you go into an organization, you talk about innovation, things like that, understanding what their definition is certainly part of that, because I've seen some innovation that seems kind of archaic to me, but to them, it's brand new. It's innovating. It's like, okay, it's okay. It's moving forward in a productive manner, and you using new technology. Now, maybe old to the industry, but it's new to you. You think you're innovating? Fantastic. Let's run with it. Let's go. So it's amazing work. It's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of, but that's the same with any change. I mean, it's amazing field to get into.
Anything you really don't like about working around technology?
Anything I don't like? That's an interesting question. Um, no, there are some challenges that I think make it difficult that we consistently find that resources are going down. People are trying to be more economical in their business models, and so it gets back to that, having the capacity to change, having the capacity to absorb it. And then companies, there are two things that really challenge change. One is obviously the capacity I was talking about, but the other one is stability. If you're in constant motion, constant change, you'll hear this change saturation. Things are moving all over the place. You can't get a firm basis on your day-to-day activities. It's a challenge for change. And instead of doing 10, 12, 14 changes at a time, if we do 7 or 8 really well, I think it would serve organizations better than trying to just keep constantly changing. Are things always changing? Yeah, of course. But at some point you go, all right, how much can we absorb at one time? Let's let people get their feet underneath of them, and let's keep moving forward together.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Lee, this has been a fantastic conversation. And what I'm excited to share with you and to the others in the audience is you've now earned your entry into the Frontline Innovators Council, which is the private group that we have in LinkedIn with all of the other podcast guests and hosts, me and Gene Signorini. And we'd love to invite you to come and participate in that group. And it speaks to some of what you said earlier about networking with other professionals in the space that are practicing change management and technology innovation, and specifically those men and women who are doing this around, frontline workers or in companies that have, disproportionate numbers of frontline workers, however they define that. And so we'd like to welcome you to that. You'll get an invitation from us later this afternoon to come in and join the conversation. And we're just getting started this week. So it's today, we're recording this on October 8th. It'll get published here hopefully later this month in October, but you'll get invited into the council today. And we look forward to having you be a part of that conversation.
Man, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. Happy to join. And, I really look forward to talking with other practitioners to understand what they face. People are people. So it could be, frontline workers in any field. There are lots of similarities, and just being able to share and communicate with one another is fantastic.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I welcome your participation. Look forward to staying engaged with you.
All
we
right,
do
thanks.
need to wrap it up there. So I have really enjoyed this conversation. I hope the rest of the audience has as well. If you have, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. We're looking for more fantastic guests like Lee to come and join us on the podcast. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share the story. And we'll see you on your next episode. Lee, thanks again for your time today.